Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. So, hi. Hello. Now MB's afraid to talk.
I was afraid to speak. No, I fucked up. And I got profanity in my first sentence.
Yes. Profanity established. That's the ground rule. We've popped it. We have a guest here today. We have Christina Bergling. And Christina, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a horror author. I've been published for close to 10 years. I got 5 books out. The newest one was Followers a few years ago. I've been in kind of a short story place lately, so lots of anthologies in the past couple of years.
Yeah. I get that. Because that's how I started. That's where I started. Short stories. So what do you do as a day job?
I'm a technical writer for this big cybersecurity company.
Okay. Yeah. I remember going way back when I was still going to writers night at Pikes Peak Writers, but way in the beginning, we were at, it used to be an elementary school, Ivywild?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And in this restaurant, it's all brick in there. And so you couldn't hear
a damn thing if you were at one
end of a table. But anyway, I remember one person saying they were a technical writer, so they could never write their fiction because they didn't have anything left over. Do you find that
I did not
separate it?
I never had that problem because work writing is boring. And it was almost like, oh, I can finally, the muscles worked all day and now they can do something fun.
Now they can really stretch. That's kind of how I viewed it too, because I've done some technical writing, right? And I was like, oh, okay. But to each person their own. I get if you can't do it, you can't do it. If you don't have creative energy, you can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it would depend on the workday, but an average workday, I usually could come home and still be into it. But if it was an exceptionally daunting one, I might not be into anything.
Right. Well, and that's like if your well is empty or whatever, if your energy is down, then it's not going to happen. Are you going to StokerCon this year?
I am not this year. I need to. One of these years I will pull it together, but
I am also not.
Where is it this year?
Oh, I don't remember.
Once you decide not to go, you're like,
Right? I'm like, I don't want to know. I'm tempted to. I think it's Worldcon's in Glasgow this year.
Oh.
And that one I find deeply tempting. I was like, I want to go there. I want to listen to Glaswegians talk.
When is Worldcon? Or do you remember?
Well, isn't it in the summer? When did we drive to Kansas?
I was just trying to play that back in my head.
It was nice enough we weren't worried about a blizzard.
Right. But no, I can't.
I feel like it's in June or something. But maybe, I don't know. So
I spend all my money on horror festivals. So then I'm like, oh, I should do some writing stuff.
Right. Well, I don't have any money left over.
I went to Telluride and Colorado Festival of Horror and 6 Feet Under 3 times. So I guess that's the year.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I was going to say, you go to Telluride for that. And I still haven't made it out there. And it's not looking like this year I'm going to make it either. But it sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think this will be year number 8 for us.
Wow.
Okay.
So and we've definitely seen the progression in how much bigger it's getting. We used to book our room last minute. No, we book it in 9 months in advance now.
And it's a film festival for people who don't know, a horror film festival.
Yep. But
from what a friend of mine who was going every year until they moved out of state said, is that basically the whole town kind of gets into it now. And you'll find restaurants will do some theme things sometimes and stuff like that. But
yeah, they have one authors panel where they usually have 3 authors. For a while, it was Stephen Graham Jones and Paul Tremblay. They've kind of started shaking it up the past couple years, but they'll do a campfire reading and they'll do a Q&A panel and they'll have a book signing and all that. So they kind of splice in stuff with the movies. So you can go, they take over a bar every night after the showing. I am too old to be doing that after sitting in movies for 12 hours. But if you want to, it's available to you.
And do you usually stay at one of the hotels, or do you do like an Airbnb? Because
We
it's a
do
little town.
Yeah, we do an Airbnb exclusively to be able to cook our own food.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we go with like a pack. Like, this will totally come up in my story later. But we go in a group and like commune meals, all that to kind of reduce the cost.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because that's kind of why for years I looked at it and went, oh, that's going to be steep with the room and everything on top of it. So maybe not.
Yeah.
Do your kids go?
Not yet. And historically, it's been whatever, no age limit. Parents should be responsible for your kids. But as they're getting bigger, you're starting to see more verbiage like 18 and up, and mine aren't 18 and up. So,
yeah, I know from the organizer point of view, you don't think about kids until it becomes an issue. Because you just think people know. People are going to have common sense. And then all of a sudden you start getting complaints about people who are not exercising common sense. And I'll just leave that there. But then you have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, my kids watch a good amount of horror.
Mhm.
And they're like, why can't we go? And I said, because with these movies, it's not like going to one in the theater where I can look up, why is this rated R?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a wild card. I was like, I've seen movies that I didn't want to see. And it's too late. The description did not match what was on screen, and I'm in it, and I'm traumatized now. And you have to be able to handle anything for me to be able to bring you.
Right. Definitely at least like the 16 up at that point. And
yeah. Because we saw one when we went to the Stanley Film Festival before that turned into the Overlook.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And no. Like, we just walked straight to the bar. Straight to the bar. And you could sit there at the bar and watch the people who had just come out of that showing, and you're like,
you were there.
Come join us. We're going to try to drink that out of our minds.
So what was I'm not going to ask you what the film was, but what was the topic that was so disturbing?
It was children.
Oh, no. Oh, God, no.
And it was not as suggestive as I'm accustomed to. And I was like, I didn't need those visuals. Like,
oh, yikes. Yeah, every little once in a while there's something like that. By now, I've heard of most, if it's not a new indie movie, right? You know when you go into something else because you've heard about it, like rumblings through the horror community. You know what the crazy thing is and kind of what you're getting into. I'm trying to think, what is it? Irreversible I knew about before I watched it, but it's intense.
That one is so brilliant, but I will never watch it again. Never.
And like beautiful in some weird ways, but yeah, I will never watch it again. It has, I think it's still considered the longest, like minute by minute rape scene. Because there's no flinching, it's direct, it's ongoing, it's not like clips. Like, you know, when you watch it on something else, you're kind of seeing little snippets and you're seeing it from different angles. It's
like they set the camera there and it just happened.
No.
So that's everybody's fair warning on that one. But I went into it knowing, and that's a hell of a lot different than going into it and having no idea you're about to be hit with it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah, good stuff. It is a really well done movie. It's just, it's hard. So do you want to start?
I can start. Now we're jumping from horrific topics to what I'm doing, which is not a horrific topic.
Palate cleanser.
That's right. Yes. Hello. My name is Envy. I'll be serving your palate cleanser today. Because sometimes I just need a big dose of mayhem. So that's what I went with this time. I needed mayhem. And I found someone who could kick ass and take names. And it's a woman. So I'm even happier. Where I am. So I'm going to say first to anybody listening, please excuse me because I'm going to butcher some Irish pronunciations, and then I'm just going to switch to the Anglicization of their names.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think I'm saying that word right either.
It's okay. You can feel better when I massacre the Italian names in mine.
Oh, thank you. So the first one is the title, because everybody's talking about Grace, or everybody. I saw it online a couple places. Grace O'Malley. Mm-hmm. The Irish pirate queen. And I'm like, her name wasn't Grace. And she was never called Grace. That happened long after she died because they couldn't pronounce her name, which is not difficult. So it is spelled, it does start with a GR. It's pronounced Grainne, It's Grainne. I looked it up. I listened to like 4 times because I wanted to get it right. I was like, I got to get at least her name right. So it's Grainne ni Malia. That's my closest approximation.
Henceforth known as Grace.
No, I call her Grainne in the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
And it was tough to type.
Yeah.
That's not a word I type a lot. So she was born in County Mayo, Ireland, around 1530. So anybody who listens regularly knows I like to talk about what was going on in the rest of the world at that time. And this time I'm like, basically floods and religious proclamations. And that was it. That's all you need to know. Henry VIII was denied a divorce. So there you are. We're all set. We all have pegged where we are in time. So Grainne was the only daughter of Owen and Margaret Malia, which we are now going to change that last name to O'Malley because it's easier to pronounce. Her father Owen was an Irish chieftain. And while most of their neighbors were farmers, he took to the water and controlled Clew Bay, which was where they lived. So he made his living fishing, trading, and taxing others who fished in the waters that they controlled. He was known as, and I love this Irish proclivity, his last name was O'Malley, so he was known as the O'Malley. I just love that. So he built castles along the coast to protect his holdings. He just was a mover and a shaker. And to me, it just blows me away. All this was happening in the 1500s. So local legend maintains that when Grainne was young, she wanted to accompany her father on a trip to Spain. He told her she couldn't go because her long hair would tangle in the ship's ropes. Okay. You had the same reaction I did. I'm like, that is a weak argument, Dad.
Yeah, it is. It's just that girls are bad luck on boats, isn't it?
Exactly. Because I'm pretty sure they already knew how to braid then.
Yeah.
So that was not a new thing. So you know what happened next? She hacked her hair off and shamed her father into taking her. Although I'm wondering if Mom had anything to do with that. Her daughter comes home with her hair hacked off. It's like, you are fucking taking her now.
Look what you made her do.
Exactly. So for a while after that, because she did apparently just hack it off, she was known as Grainne the Bald.
All right.
They're big on nicknames here. She did have a brother named Donald, but when her father died, she took over leadership of the clan. She took over the land. She took over the sea holdings. And this was despite the fact that by law, only male members of the clan could become chief. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about some other clan law later on, but yes, only men could be the chief. But she was fully accepted as his heir, as the one who was in charge and in control.
Well, she sounds like somebody who, they were like, they just didn't have a choice.
I don't think, no, she was a force of nature. So she had a brother named Donald. She married a man named, I'm going to butcher another one. So her brother was Donald. She married a man named Donald O'Flaherty, which was later anglicized to O'Flaherty. And eventually she had a half brother named Donald of the Pipes.
Oh my God.
I know. Could they not pick another name? No, everybody has the same name.
Big D, little D.
Yeah. No. Now you've
Listen, I had 2 friends named Richard and we called them Big Dick and Little Dick.
It's perfect.
Straight up. We knew who we were talking about. There was never any confusion. They just had to go along with it.
Okay.
I was at work too.
I still want to say something rude and inappropriate, but I'm going to go on. So I know. Can you believe I am resisting?
Don't do it on my account.
I'm trying to teach myself self-restraint. So, when she got married to that Donald, it took place in 1546 when she would have been approximately 16 years old. It was considered a good match politically because he was due to become chief of the clan O'Flaherty. So this would have strengthened both clans. He reportedly brought 1,000 head of cattle and horses to the marriage. But fun fact, here's the other part of the law I was going to talk about. Whatever dowry Grainne brought to the marriage, by Irish clan law of the time, if the marriage dissolved, the dowry had to be returned to the wife.
No.
Women were also allowed to obtain, own, and manage their own properties and business concerns independent of their husbands.
That's great. But then here I think about what is often the incentive for like spousal murder, right? And so it seems to me you wouldn't divorce your wife then because you don't want to give back the dowry. So you'd kill her off.
That could be.
Just it's like, I feel like that probably happened quite a bit. It's like, yay, great rights.
Except I'm thinking for most of them, it was on a much smaller scale. It was a couple of sheep. I mean, it wasn't ships. It wasn't a navy. It wasn't.
Yeah, I just kind of know men.
Well, yeah.
Historically. And so they're like 2 sheep, whatever the fuck, they're mine.
True. Yeah. So together, Grainne and Donal had 3 children, Owen, Maeve, and Murrow. I didn't look up the pronunciation. That's how it's spelled. We're going with it. Owen was the eldest. He had a reputation as being kind and forgiving and perhaps too trusting. Maeve made a politically advantageous marriage to Richard the Devil's Hook Burke.
Oh.
Who was, they had several children together, and he was a big fan of his mother-in-law. Like, he fought for her and was an advisor to her. The youngest, Murrow, enjoyed warfare as much as his father. He was also a raging misogynist and was known for beating his sister and refusing to listen to his mother because she was a woman.
Wow.
Despite the fact, all this capability that she exuded every day, he didn't care. He needed to be beaten. Many historical accounts hold that Murrow betrayed his family to the English and was later shunned by his mother.
Yeah.
Understandably. It's also another bit of family lore that Grainne acted as the leader of this clan because Donal was impetuous and famously short-tempered. He liked to make war, not love. So he feuded constantly with some of the neighboring clans. It's like he just couldn't leave it alone. She had the political mind. He was just fucking punch him in the head, work it out that way. So for the politics, Donal expected to be made chief of the name by Queen Elizabeth. But in 1564, his cousin Murrow was named instead. The next year, Donal was assassinated while hunting on one of his estates, which was believed to stem from his clash with Clan Joyce over control of Cook's Castle. So at that point, Clan Joyce thought they would skip in and just take possession of Cook's Castle because they'd been fighting this guy for years. He's dead. They're going to take over the castle. However, Grainne fought back, forced Clan Joyce to retreat. And after that, because she was able to hold the castle, instead of being called Cook's Castle, it was changed to Hen's Castle.
Yeah.
So good on her. Then she moved herself and her people. So after her success there, taking the castle back, she moved herself and her people back to Clare Island, to what is now called Grainne's Castle. And legend holds that she took a shipwrecked sailor as her lover, as one does. But he was in turn killed by the Clan McMahon of Ballyvoy. Apparently there's more than one Clan McMahon. I'm not going to... Okay, we'll just go with it. In return for them killing her lover, she attacked Clan McMahon in their stronghold of Duna Castle, where she killed her lover's murderers. This earned her the nickname the Dark Lady of Duna.
Nice.
Yeah, I kind of like
I
that.
love how they just give out like all these titles and nicknames and stuff. Yep. They were like always a nickname. You have
anytime something happens, we rename it.
That's right. Like add this to your list.
And strong women are often get nicknames that are not as nice as this. So I would take the Dark Lady. I mean, really, who wouldn't?
Yeah, I think we all would.
I grew up in a town called DeGrasse, so the Dark Lady of DeGrasse kind of flows. It's better than what they probably call me. So anyway, a year later, in 1566, Grainne married Iron Richard Bourke, who had iron. He was called Iron Richard because he had an ironworks near his castle. So she was a woman who carried a grudge. So she went back to Ballycroy and attacked and captured Duna Castle, which is, it's kind of amazing for her time. She could pick her battles and the men would just follow her. It didn't matter. She was that good of a leader. She could say, all right, we're going to fuck these people up now. And they're like, we're in.
All right, let's go.
Okay, there's going to be some political commentary. And I always imagine that there's some mysterious historian listening to the podcast and clutching the sides of their head, yelling, "That's a gross oversimplification." Because I have too much imagination and I oversimplify. But it's not a political podcast, so I'm allowed. So, in 1576, Grainne engaged in something called the surrender and re-grant process, which was a method by which Irish clans were supposed to be converted from a clan-based power structure into the English-controlled Kingdom of Ireland. It was supposed to convert them to English common law instead of Irish law. So basically, it was supposed to be a nonviolent way to subjugate Irish clan leaders. Prior to this, when Grainne was born, Henry VIII was the ruler of England, and he just was like, fucking let him do whatever. He didn't care. The clans of Ireland were left mostly to their own devices, and that seemed to work for everybody. So, while this was happening, Grainne's holdings were more than a week's march from Dublin. So Dublin, closest to England, that's where most of the English power was concentrated. And she was often at sea, which meant the English crown's hold on her and her properties was fairly weak, which was what she wanted. So in 1579, an expedition attacked her castle at Clare Island, but they were repelled and barely escaped with their lives. So enter Richard Bingham. And this is where, if you feel so inclined, you can boo, because he is not a late-breaking hero in this saga. He was a commander in the English Navy, and he served Queen Elizabeth I in the Tudor conquest of Ireland. For his troubles, he was later in life, he was appointed governor of a western province of Ireland, a very sizable province of Ireland. So at one point, to put down a rebellion, just to tell you what kind of a guy he was, he kidnapped and put to death 3 brothers who were ages 14, 9, and 7.
Boo.
Right?
Yes.
He famously said the Irish were never taken with words, but with swords. So, if you remember, I talked about Grainne's oldest son, Owen. When Bingham sent troops to seize Owen's castle, Owen saw a peaceful resolution to this. He allowed the forces in and played host to them. That is not that unusual back then. You wanted to limit the damage to your people. You wanted to limit damage to your property. So you would let them in, and it was kind of a peaceful surrender thing.
And then you would have a red wedding.
Oh, yeah. In this case, he was bound, tortured, and murdered. And Bingham took over his castle. After that, Bingham also captured Murrow, one of her sons by her second husband, and that half-brother named Donald of the Pipes, and imprisoned them on various charges. So Grainne, here's something else she's absolutely famous for, sailed to England and met with Queen Elizabeth I to petition for their release. And they make a big point that this conflab was conducted in English because the Queen spoke English and Latin. And Grainne, I'm like, who the fuck speaks Latin? And Grainne spoke Irish and English. So the Queen didn't speak Irish, and Grainne sensibly did not speak Latin. I think sensibly. So after this conflab, where it's apparent she went in to speak to the Queen, who was trying to subjugate her entire country, and just met with her as an equal. She was not obsequious. She was not groveling. But she went in and made her case, and the Queen ultimately sided with her and ordered Bingham to make reparations, release his captives, and to let these people just live their damn lives. He balked, despite the fact that Grainne, I love this, hand-delivered the Queen's orders to him when she returned to Ireland. Petty bitch, I love it. I mean, it's like, here you go. Don't believe me? It's in the Queen's own hand. Do what you will with that. So after this, when she attempted to rebuild her fleet and her livelihood, Bingham forced Grainne to accept his troops on her ships. And he even made her act against her own relatives because he claimed they were rebelling against the crown. And because she had been and spoken with the Queen, she had to, at least to the English, she had to appear that she was being reasonable and on their side. He also stationed his troops on her property forcing her to support them and driving her into financial ruin. Invading armies, they're not cheap. She had to appeal directly to the queen again to get Bingham's foot off of her neck. So it wasn't until 1595 when the tide finally turned for Bingham and he was forced to flee back to England, where he was briefly imprisoned. When he was finally taken to trial for his crimes against the Irish, he was acquitted. And like I said, later in life, he was given a large estate to rule over in Ireland. After he'd already proved he hated the people, so why not let him rule over them?
Exactly like how they did everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Grainne died around 1603 at Rockfleet Castle, which would have put her at 73 years old, which is kind of amazing for anybody in the 1500s to live to be 73. Sadly, most of the records of her life are from English records of her interrogations. It's from all the legal records that they kept at the time. It's been speculated that the people who were the historians in Ireland at that time were mostly male monks and who were recording the events of history, and they didn't see any reason to pay any attention to what some woman was doing. So they just skipped it. They just left it out. I already talked about that, so I'm not going to repeat it. I do question a little bit whether she should be, so she's referred to often as a pirate queen, which a pirate is called, I looked up the definition. I'm like, maybe there's something I don't know. It's someone who attacks and robs ships at sea. But that was such a small part of who she was. She was an educated woman. Her parents made sure she was educated. She was a skilled businesswoman. She was politically astute and a natural leader. So it was, hold on, I've got a quote and I don't need the entire thing. So it was unusual among Gaelic families to earn your living from the land and the sea. It was usually either one or the other. What her family did, what was started by her dad, was that they traded raw materials in exchange for luxury good. I love this part. Ferried Scottish mercenaries. I just love that. Fished, plundered, engaged in opportunistic piracy, and levied a toll on all shipping in their waters. It did say, I did read that, and again, this is another quote, an unsophisticated and opportunistic form of piracy was endemic in Ireland, comprising short distance raids along the coast or to the islands, levying the tolls, and plundering any vessel foolish enough to be unprotected. Did she engage in that? Yes, she did. There's absolutely no question that, yes, she either engaged in it directly herself or she encouraged others to do it. She encouraged those under her to do it. But she was also sophisticated and educated and had there was so much more to her than
politically savvy. Yeah, but Pirate Queen sounds more fun, and so they went with it, right?
Yes.
Like that.
So I'm going to end it with an example of why she did earn the title of Pirate Queen. It's substantiated, but I did read it in several different places, and it wasn't the same wording. So people had heard this. It said that she gave birth to one of her sons by her second husband while at sea on one of her ships. The next day, the ship was attacked, and she rose from the birthing chamber and fought alongside her men, repelling the attackers. Nice. And I'm like, sister, if you can get up and walk to the bathroom, it's a major victory after baby. And this had to have been, at a minimum, her fourth child, because she had 3 with her first husband. I don't know how many she had with her second, but at least a couple. So my sources for this were YouTube. Thank you for the pronunciation. And I will say, if anybody is looking up how to pronounce things and you go to YouTube, and the first 2 or 3 responses I found were from the same person. So I clicked on it, and they were I'm not saying that they did not pronounce the words correctly. However, I listened to the person speaking before they gave the pronunciation, and they had a very, very pronounced Eastern European accent. So I'm like, where are you from? And how do I know you're not inflecting it with? So I kept scrolling till I found Irish people.
Yeah, that's when I have to listen to YouTube. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna look for the accent that tells me that they're probably pronouncing this right.
Exactly. The Royal Museum's Greenwich, Wikipedia, of course, and History Ireland magazine. I just thought, I like her, Grace O'Malley. Even though nobody called her Grace, but Grainne O'Malley. kicking ass, taking names in the fucking 1500s.
Yeah, that's fun. Just it's funny because whenever you do an old European story,
yes,
it's all there's gonna be so much politics. When I did Elizabeth Bathory, it turned out that it was all political. It was like, no, this is not nearly as fun as I wanted it to be. And it was like Hungarian this and this civilization and these territories, and this is why this happened. And I was like, oh man, this is not what I thought I was getting.
This is not the topic I thought I was picking.
It was not. I was like, yeah, a lady who bathed in blood. To stay young.
Queen.
Right. And then it was like, listen, she probably really didn't do any of that stuff. And I was like, oh, you guys, that's like telling me that there is no Bermuda Triangle. Damn it.
Have we ever done the Bermuda Triangle?
No, because if you do it, it's already been proven that it's not a real thing. So that's like it's like a ghost story where when I start looking into it, I'm like, man, there's not even a good story about this ghost. And 2 people said they walked through the room.
And they felt something cold. Well, it's an abandoned building. What do you expect?
It's a little drafty. So, there's actually a hole in the kitchen wall. So I think that may be why you're feeling some cold, but I'm not sure.
A friend of mine from high school is redoing bought a house up northern New York. And the house was originally built in 18 something. And I was like, oh my God, do you have a ghost? I'm like coming to visit. Do you have a ghost? Like, I have squirrels. And I was like, those are equally scary in different ways. But he's like, I don't think I have a ghost.
I'm like, darn it.
Crazy woman.
You just have to go check. You have to go check.
Yes. I'm like, well, I'll be there looking for ghosts.
As your friend, I will make sure this house is clear.
Well, no, I'm not going to do anything about it.
Not even going to take some sage or something. Just smudge that shit out of there.
No, I won't be useful. I am decorative, not useful. I'm amusing. Unless you can get rid of a ghost by making it laugh so hard it pisses itself, I'm not going to be of much use.
I was like, I don't even remember what I was going to say. So whatever. But
it was the ghost pissing itself. It just wiped the brain.
It just went right out of my house, right out of my brain house.
You're welcome. So, see?
You exercised me. I don't know what to say. So Christina, are you ready?
I am ready.
Do you enjoy going to the grocery store? If so, this message is not for you. But if you're like me and procrastinate going to the store, Instacart is a fantastic option to ensure you no longer have to. Save yourself a trip and go through Instacart, where you can get a delivery through a personal shopper in as little as 1 hour. My experiences have been great so far, with my personal shopper texting me before substituting another product, letting me know when they were on their way to my house, and letting me know it had been delivered, all via text. If you click on our affiliate link in the show notes or on our website, you get free delivery on your first order over $35, and you help out our show at the same time. It's the perfect time to give it a try.
Mine's going to start, we'll circle back to the whole Telluride thing. I have this friend, as all good stories begin, and we didn't meet at Telluride. We thought we met at Telluride and connected on Facebook after. And so for a couple years, he's like, yeah, we met at the after party. We were talking at the bar. I was drunk at the bar. So I was like, sure, sounds right, whatever. And then they released like the pictures from the event, and you can clearly see there's like this almost aerial shot, and he's at one end of the bar talking to a brunette who is not me, and I'm at the other end of the bar. And I was like, we never actually met. We were internet friends. So we ended up, he now goes with us every year and is part of our little commune for staying. But yeah, we never actually met. He was sober, so I'm blaming him for the miscommunication. Anyway.
That's right. I concur. It's his fault.
But he is a ghost hunter, and his name is the Mighty Quinn, and he has this channel on YouTube called Weird Wanderings, WYRD. And so I went to him, and I was like, hey, what cool, weird stuff do you have that I don't know about? And he was working in New Orleans last year, and so naturally went everywhere and explored all the things. And he told me about the Axeman of New Orleans, which I'm kind of embarrassed that I had no familiarity with, especially since he's even a character in American Horror Story Coven.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? I missed that too. So now that I've actually done my research, he kind of reminds me of like Jack the Ripper of New Orleans, because it's this big explosion of violence. There's a lot of like widespread fear and paranoia, and then it just ends and they never figure it out. So similar in that vein. And I mean, since it's New Orleans, naturally it becomes a legend and a ghost story and all of that. Mm-hmm. So this historian Miriam Davis wrote The Axeman of New Orleans, the true story, which Quinn told me about. I haven't read it, but it is quoted literally everywhere I looked. So she's clearly the expert on the topic. The Axeman was active in New Orleans from 1917 to 1919. However, this historian believes that he was operating under the Cleaver, maybe as far back as 1910. There's a whole bunch of different theories, and I'll kind of cover some of them later. But he left an alarming amount of survivors for a serial killer. Like, a lot of people died and a lot of people lived.
Well, he wasn't good at it, but he got you with numbers.
Yeah, it was like just odds. Like, you're not all going to survive. But a good amount of them did. And the eyewitness accounts were all over the place. So like some said, middle-aged working class white guy, they were all over the place. But all the attacks were the same. It was him breaking in to an Italian grocery store in the middle of the night. He would chisel out a door panel, unlock it, and he would attack the people living there while they were sleeping with their own axe or straight razor. So he didn't even come. It was like an axe of opportunity, not I'm going to bring this with me. And he would leave the axe behind. And since like the burglary part was so consistent and he was using a railroad shoe pin, which apparently was common for burglary, the police assumed he was just an experienced burglar. But his first victims, well, what everyone pretty much agrees are the first Axeman victims, were Joseph and Catherine Maggio on May 23rd, 1918. And Joseph's brother found them. He was coming home drunk after getting accepted to the Navy, and he found them in the apartment with their throats slit with the straight razor from his own barbershop.
Oh, no.
So Joseph, the brother, was still alive, but he died soon after. But Catherine was nearly decapitated. And the police arrested Andrew, the brother.
Of course.
You're in here. This is your straight razor. But they soon released him. I think they said he couldn't fit in the chiseled out hole or something like that. But a month later, June 27th, 1918, another grocer, Louis Bessumer, and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were attacked in the quarters in the back of Bessumer's store. So they were both found in a pool of blood after no one opened the store. They had axe injuries to the temple and to the ear, but they both survived. So here's where we start having all these survivors already. And the papers picked up on this crime, but it was, oh my God, this guy had a mistress. They also got attacked by an axe, but this mistress, though, so they were not really worried about the axe part yet. They were,
but okay.
So Lowe, the mistress, was partially paralyzed by the attack, and she had surgery to correct it in August, but she died 2 days after surgery. So yes, she died of the attack, kind of.
Yeah, right.
Before she died, she told the police that she thought Bessumer, like her guy, attacked her. So he was charged with murder and served 9 months in prison before being acquitted. I don't know how he hit himself in the head with the axe after hitting her, but
like it was suicide, and there's 5 shots to their back and the back of their head, and they're like, suicide, clearly. Yeah. We don't know why the gun's not here anymore.
He took the axe and just like whacked himself with it.
Oh wait, there is a horror movie with that. Oh no, what is it? I watched it on Shudder. Like, in the last couple months, and the woman takes the axe to her face.
It's When Evil Lurks.
Yes. Yeah. That just made me think about it.
That scene was Anyway. Yeah. Then on August 5th, 1918, 8-month pregnant Anna Schneider was attacked. She woke up to a dark figure standing over her, who then bashed her in the face. When her husband found her, her scalp was lacerated and bleeding heavily, but she survived and gave birth to a healthy daughter 2 days later.
So this guy doesn't seem to be very strong, or there's no room in these rooms.
Yeah. So, I mean, not killing Anna must have not done enough, because 5 days later, he attacks Joseph Romano, another grocer. And the 2 nieces living with Joseph woke up to the commotion of the assault and went into his room, and they found him wounded and the Axeman fleeing. Romano then walked to the ambulance, but he died 2 days later from the head trauma. So again, he died from the attack eventually.
Yeah.
What has he got against Italian grocers?
Yeah.
We'll touch on that. Don't worry.
Okay.
So by this point, the people in New Orleans are like starting to freak out. They're calling to report axemen sightings. They're finding axes and chisels and doors and windows messed with all over. And they're carrying shotguns around like on self-imposed patrols at night. They're taking shifts to stay up and watch the family. So the city's bordering on panic. And then the axeman kind of just goes dormant for a bit. He doesn't reappear. And when he does, he starts attacking across the Mississippi in Grainne on March 19th, 1919. But again, he's targeting an Italian grocer. So Charles and Rose Cormiglia were found by their neighbor after the neighbor heard screams. Rose was clutching their dead 2-year-old daughter and bleeding from her head, and Charles was on the floor. There was a bloody axe left behind, and a back door panel was removed. Both Rose and Charles survived and were treated for the skull fractures. Obviously, the daughter did not. Rose claimed they were attacked by Lorlando Giordano, which is the neighbor who found them, and his 18-year-old son, Frank. Charles, the husband, said her accusations weren't true, but the Giordanos were still arrested and found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang, and Lorlando, who was quite elderly and determined incapable of doing murdery things, was sentenced to life in prison. So after their trials, Charles divorces Rosie, and it took her months to recant after that. She eventually told the newspaper that she had falsely accused them, some sort of business animosity. But her testimony was the only evidence, so they were released. So
so they had not put the one to death yet.
They had not hung him yet, so it's just almost. And then at this point, we get another kind of like murder break. There's this letter sent to the newspaper by the Axeman, but I'm gonna circle back to that. So things are quiet for a few weeks, but people are still pretty paranoid. And so on August 10th, 1919, he comes back. And it's another Italian grocer, again attacked in his own home as he slept. And he woke up to see the Axeman and then took a blow to the head. But then he survived and ran to his neighbor. And then September 2nd, 1919, it's a local druggist, William Carson. He escaped an attack by firing several shots at an intruder who broke his door and left an axe behind. The next day, Sarah Lawman was attacked in her locked home by someone with an axe. Her neighbors came to check on her since she was young and living alone, and they found her unconscious under her bed with a severe head injury and missing teeth. Despite a concussion, she survived, and they found a bloody axe on the front yard. And so we're back to public panic, but another break. And it was 2 months later that the last attack happened. And it was on October 27th, 1919. Grocer Mike Pepitone was murdered with an axe, and his wife Esther came into the bedroom as the Axeman was fleeing. So Pepitone murder is the last one attributed to the Axeman. So like there's our murder timeline. Now we'll kind of get into the other sort of weirder parts. And I mentioned there was this letter sent to the newspaper, and allegedly it was sent by the Axeman himself. So I'm just going to read the whole thing. Okay. And it's Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether surrounding your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axemen. When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe be smeared with blood and brains of he who I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but his satanic majesty, Francois Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it was better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axemen. I don't think there is a need for such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as the most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your every city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, March 19th, 1919, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much better for the people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit ever that existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. The Axeman.
I feel like I went out on a date with this guy.
And I'm like, as I'm listening to it, I'm like, but dude, you didn't even kill half the people you're trying out.
You think that I think that your ego is a little bigger than your actual killing ability.
Yeah.
So, and the paper runs this.
Of course.
That is what ran in the paper. So he basically threatens the entire city, says anyone not listening to jazz on March 19th on the chopping block. And New Orleans listened. Legends recount that night was the loudest night in New Orleans history. Jazz clubs were overflowing, and then it was in all the houses, like it was everywhere. And no one got murdered.
See, I thought I was confusing. I remembered this part of it.
Yeah.
And I thought I was confusing it with like a different story. So yes, like, because that's always how they introduce this story is like that they scared him away with jazz or whatever.
Yeah. And like, so like the question is, does the Axeman like really have this this affinity for jazz? Was it even him? Like, of course, there's like several theories. And some people think the Axeman was getting revenge against Italian Americans because Black jazz musicians weren't getting their due credit. And then some people,
what?
Oh, yeah. Despite the fact that statistically serial killers hunt their own, so he was probably Italian.
Yeah.
And no eyewitness account said it was a Black guy. But maybe he was just super upset about, and there was information about the first jazz song being attributed to a Italian artist and it not being accurate. And then there was another theory that the Axeman was upset that the Navy shuttered the red light district Storyville in 1917. So it was like the gambling dens, the brothels, the dance halls, the clubs, everything where jazz was the most prevalent. But the historian, Miriam Davis, has a totally different theory. She thinks John Joseph Davila actually wrote the letter. He was a jazz musician, and he wrote the song The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz, Don't Scare Me Papa, after the letter was published, and he made a lot of money off of it. So, and Marion also points out that the letter was clearly written by someone who was educated, who had a familiarity with Greek mythology, and that doesn't mesh with the assumption that the Axeman was working class. So, since most of the victims were Italian, authorities and historians often believe the murders were ethnically motivated. Like, the Italian business community was pretty well established in New Orleans, even before the Civil War. In the late 1800s, Sicilian laborers would come over and they'd work on post-emancipation sugarcane and cotton plantations. And they would usually work for a few years and save up some money and then start a shop. And it was usually a grocery shop. So it would be plantation worker, truck farmer, peddler, grocer. And so in like 1900, these small Italian businesses are showing up everywhere. And then they're starting to take over the corner grocery business. In 1880, they were 7% of stores in New Orleans. By 1900, they're 19%. And then by 1920, they're half.
Oh, okay. That's a big jump.
Yeah. So they faced a lot of prejudice and suspicion, occasionally a lynch mob. New Orleans citizens had a lot of notions about vendettas and the mafia and blackhanders. So when the Axemen started targeting Italians, the assumption was it was all connected to mafia activity. But John D'Antonio, who was a mafia expert and detective at the time, called bullshit, saying that a black hand would never leave so many survivors.
Right.
Like, he wasn't good enough at killing to be in the mafia. And he and the police superintendent, Frank Mooney, agreed that the attacker was a fiend. They were quoted calling him a Jekyll and Hyde personality, like Jack the Ripper. So basically, he's a serial killer.
Yeah.
But
not a very good one.
not a very good one. And so we talked, like, the last murder being Mike Pepitone. His wife survives, and there's a theory because she goes on and she moves to Los Angeles after the murder. And she gets married to this guy named Angelo Alabano. And on the second anniversary of Pepitone's death, her late husband, her new husband vanishes. And he had dealings with a man named Joseph Mumphrey. And on December 5th, 1921, Mumphrey shows up at Esther's home, the widow, and he's demanding money and jewelry. And he tells her if she doesn't comply, he's going to kill her the same way he killed her husband.
Oh.
Esther gets a gun and shoots him and kills him. She successfully murders him.
Go Esther.
So the police arrive, and Esther tells them that Mumphrey was the same man she saw when her husband Pepitone was murdered. I guess there was circumstantial evidence that linked Mumphrey to Pepitone's murder. He led a blackmailing gang in New Orleans that targeted Italians. However, there was nothing concrete enough to convince, like, the police at the time or experts later. So it could be that Mumphrey was the Axeman, unlikely, or that Pepitone was actually killed by gang violence rather than the Axeman. And they're just like, let's use an axe, and they'll think it's the Axeman.
That would make sense, though. If that's happening and the city's scared and all that stuff, then why
just
not
take an axe everywhere?
Yeah, just use that to cover it up.
So the Axeman remains unsolved and a mystery. So, I mean, it's New Orleans. In that space, he's kind of become New Orleans boogeyman. And the murders inspired a subgenre of New Orleans music called Axeman's Jazz. And it was started by that hit by Davila and his potential, like, viral marketing campaign of sending the threatening letter to the paper. By tradition in New Orleans, from March 13th to 15th, most pubs, clubs, discos, bars, everything in New Orleans play jazz at least one night to ward off the Axeman. And I mean, all of them, not just the jazz clubs, like the country bars, the goth clubs, across the board. And the legend of the Axeman even more at the time of the murders. Like even back then, it was conflated to include the idea that he didn't actually break in. He didn't remove door panels, that he would chisel a little hole and then make his way through that. So it became this story where there was no sign of entry and he was able to just slip into these tiny houses unnoticed and just paint the walls with everybody's blood. And Joseph and Catherine Maggio are said to haunt their house. There's screaming and shrieking heard. Joseph Romano is said to haunt the hospital where he died. And then the haunted hotel of New Orleans is said to be where the Axeman hid between murders or attempted murders. The locals believe that his ghost resides there still, and hotel visitors will report wandering shadows, pools of blood, EVPs, weird cell phone stuff. So that brings me back to my friend, the Mighty Quinn, where we started. So when he was in New Orleans, he went to the haunted hotel twice. And he doesn't buy that it's the Axeman, because how do you know if you never knew who he was? If you can't prove who he was, how do you know he's there? But he said the hotel is very haunted by a dark entity that wants to hurt people. He has a couple episodes on his channel from there, and he brought a hatchet with him, shamelessly, and he played some jazz, and he said he saw a lot of activity. While he was investigating the courtyard, his little spirit box asked for a smoke, so he lit a cigarette and put it in the ashtray, left it with the camera, went away, and he said when he came back, he had recorded the ashtray kind of moving. So that's all on his channel if you want to see it. But so somewhat successful serial killer, possible ghost.
I like it. I always like that combo. You have like the good story to go with both.
Yeah. And as far as references, I got some information from Smithsonian Magazine, Legends of America, NOLA Ghosts, and Louisiana True Crime.
Nice.
And obviously my friend, the Mighty.
Yes.
I can't help but going back to the fact that whoever it was had to have been slight in some way, and they never seem to have done anything about that in the investigation. The man that they accused first was too small to fit into the panel that had been removed, or whatever it was, the small space. And so, and then of course, I really think if you can't kill people when you're hitting them in the head with an axe, that you are weaker, right? That it couldn't be a big, strong man, or the rooms had to have been so small they couldn't get a good swing in. But we've read of plenty of axe murder, because that was like the most popular way to kill everybody for a while, was to take their own axes out of their yard.
At that time.
Yes.
In history.
And go in. And so those rooms would all have been of kind of comparable sizes at the time, right? And
I can't help when you kept telling us, and they survived their head injuries. I'm like, it's like the killer might as well have thrown shoes at them.
12-year-old boy? Was it a small woman? Like, and then did they ever describe the attacker, and did it sound like a full-size man, you know?
There was one of, like, when everyone was super paranoid, it was said that he was disguising himself as a woman and hopping over fences dressed as a woman.
Okay. Interesting.
Because hopping over a fence is much easier in a dress.
Because back then they wouldn't have even, like, it could have been a woman, and they would have been like, a woman doesn't go and kill men with axes.
I don't know what part of the axe you're hitting them with if you can't kill them with a couple of strikes to the head.
The handle.
They're throwing the axe. They're kind of yeeting it. The whole thing.
Because all of them are like bleeding from the head trauma. And I'm like, it's a sharp, its purpose is to...
That's true, but head injuries, head lacerations bleed profusely anyway.
Yeah.
But how can you not? And
I'm like, if you went and researched the city and got all in depth, there'd probably be like some small man that was famous for being some small man, and they never looked at this dude, and he yelled at Italian grocers all the time. And
I want to get famous. Like, I want to be infamous for doing my job at like a solid 25%.
Right. Go down and history as this killer, and then it's like, yeah, okay, so I only kill like 2 of the 30 people that I
attacked.
If anybody else had that kind of a record,
everyone was real scared.
Well, I mean, you would be if you woke up and someone was swinging an axe at your head.
Well, yeah,
but it was a glancing blow.
I mean, it might have been the survivors causing the paranoia because they could give account of what happened, but they're still alive. So many of them were still alive.
I figure it's fair because you were hit in the head. So honestly, if you can't remember all the things, like that's fair. Also, you woke up, it was dark.
And the one woman who her neighbors found her under her bed, and I'm like, that had to have taken a while. You don't walk in someone's house and go, she's missing. Quick, look under her bed. I mean,
is she crying? Is she screaming? What's happening?
Yeah.
What's going on? And then I also found the letter interesting because, of course, the letters from hell for Jack Ripper and stuff. Jack the Ripper. Jack Ripper. Let's just shorten it. You all know what I'm talking about. So, but also, if religion was super prevalent at the time, it makes sense that gets drawn in. But
yeah. And I mean, reading the letter, you're just like, man, what?
Yeah, it's kind of like, really?
Like if someone published that sort of letter now, unless it was, mass shooting threat or a bomb threat, everybody be like, okay, cool.
All right. This your manifesto? Cool.
Nobody would see it unless it was published on Facebook.
And went viral that way.
Because there are like 4 of us left who read the newspaper.
That's true. And I think they stopped really probably not that long ago when you think about the history of journalism. Wholesale printing killers' letters after a certain point.
In like the 70s, right? Like when serial killing really saw it's like loft.
Unless you wrote it as a letter to the editor, because they'll publish anything as a letter to the editor. It doesn't even have to have facts. No, you can say anything in a letter to the editor.
So that's where social media came from. It's just one long letter to the editor.
That's kind of true. I was also I thought it was funny because I read some article and I go into the comments a lot because I'll find extra information if the article didn't cover things. But of course, there's always nasty, awful things down there. And I thought it was funny that somebody said something nasty, awful, and the person who responded to them very succinctly and basically told them how awful they were for saying it. Like their name was like Maggie the Troll or something on there. And I was like, the troll is yelling at the trolls. And I said, why is this happening? So that was just this week. All right. So I'm going to do the Sea Orphan. Here's what's funny. Is I was like, oh, we're going to have Christina on. I can do the most demented story I want to, right? And then I was all excited and I was like, I don't know, what am I going to do? And then I saw this meme and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So I went and looked into it and it's not, it's so tame, but I was like, oh, but it's interesting that this happened. And I just got too sucked in. So then here's the tame one that I'm doing when I actually have a horror writer on here with me. All right, I'm doing the Sea Orphan. She was also sometimes called the Sea Waif, but she's mostly the Sea Orphan. On the afternoon of November 13th, 1961, the oil tanker Gulf Lion was in the waters around the Bahamas on its way to Puerto Rico when the ship's crew saw a dinghy floating toward them. A man stood on the dinghy, waving his arms and yelling that he had a dead baby aboard. That's what he said. I have a dead baby here. I have a dead baby here. So from the ship above, they could see that there was, in fact, this slight redheaded girl, and it would turn out she was 7 years old. Pulled on board along with the body, the man, identified as 44-year-old Julian Harvey, the captain of a ship called Bluebell, although actually he was a skipper, and I think I call him the captain the whole way through, and I don't really know the difference except that he didn't own the boat, so maybe that's why he's called a skipper for captaining it. I don't know. I called him captain, so sorry, ship people. Whatever. Told a harrowing tale of the ship being caught in a storm, tossed upon the waves when a massive squall flipped the ship over. The mast snapped and pierced the hull, but only after injuring his wife, 34-year-old Mary, the ship's cook, and Arthur Duperalt, a 40-year-old optometrist who specialized in contact lenses, which I was like, wow, how old are contact lenses? I guess I didn't know that they were around in the 60s. The mast, Harvey said, had separated him from the others when it fell, bringing all the sails and all the rigging down with it. And so there was this, it was too much to get over. He tried to get through the mess on the deck to the others, who aside from Arthur and Mary included Arthur's wife, Jean, who was 38, and their children, 14-year-old Brian, 11-year-old Terry Jo, and 7-year-old Renee. Before he could get through to them, gas lines in the engine room blew and a fire broke out, forcing him to abandon the ship, leaving his wife and passengers behind. He'd found little Renee floating in the water and had pulled her aboard the dinghy and tried to resuscitate her, but she hadn't come around and he simply hadn't been able to leave her body behind, feeling it was the most respectful to bring her back to her remaining family so she at least could have a proper burial. Doesn't that sound nice?
No. I'm like, no, I don't.
You're prepared for what's coming.
I know. I've met you.
I was like, this detail being included is suspect.
Yes.
Authorities in Nassau, where he was initially taken, were mildly suspicious of the man for a few reasons. First, the dinghy was really well stocked with supplies for him having jumped on there on an emergency basis. And he clearly wanted for nothing on this dinghy. Like, however long he was going to be on the dinghy, he was set. Secondly, he was very calm, dispassionately telling his story. An autopsy showed that Renee had drowned, which didn't cast any doubt, right? That's okay. So she might have fallen off the boat when all this happened. It was conjectured she'd been flung from the ship. She drowned. With no proof, the ship and bodies not found. They could not find any of this. Authorities allowed him to go home to Miami. But then, on November 16th, a different ship, the Captain Theo, a Greek freighter sailing from Belgium to Texas, was moving through the Northwest Providence Channel nearby. The second officer, Nikolaos Spakidakis, I love his name so much, was in charge of watching for anything amiss in the ocean, and he happened to catch a glimpse of something white that he'd previously taken as breaking waves, because it was just mixed in with all the sea foam. And it was bobbing along, but what he noticed, it didn't disappear. When the foam would kind of dissipate, this white would still be there. So he's watching this intently as they're approaching it. He thought at first it was debris in the water, then thought it was possibly a small dinghy with a fisherman on it, because as he got closer, he could make out a slight human form on it, right? Sitting up. And then it got even closer, and he realized it was a tiny white cork float. And on that 2-by-5 foot float was a child. She sat awkwardly in the boat, her legs over the side, her feet her hands behind her bracing, because I have a picture and I'll post it of these. It's called a float because it's not a raft. It had like mesh, like rope crossed on the bottom, and it was just a frame that was white cork, so it would float. So there's no surface to sit in except for this mesh, so like that you're in the water. Like a life preserver if it had mesh under it.
Okay.
And so her feet are dangling. They're just kind of right over the water. She didn't call out to them, but at some point she did kind of very weakly wave at them. And she stared up at them, clearly exhausted, possibly in shock, likely in shock. She wore pink pants. One article said they were corduroy. One said they were pedal pushers. So maybe they were corduroy pedal pushers.
Ew.
And a white shirt, no shoes. There were sharks circling the float mere inches from her bare feet. So the men on the ship are shrieking at her, don't jump in the water, stay on the float. And they don't know how long these sharks would have been circling her.
That's horrifying.
Yeah. Spakidakis called for his captain, Stylianos Kostadontis, who came quickly to the bridge. He ordered the ship brought to a halt, and they lowered a life raft with a man named Evangelos Pantsalos in it. They were afraid one of the bigger boats would hit her float, because now they were too close to her, and knock her into the shark-infested water. So Pantsalos was able to get her off the float and onto the lifeboat. Then he got the boat over to the side of the freighter, and the crew above lowered a bowline so he could loop it over her shoulders, and they hoisted her up. And then he was able to climb the ladder back up. The crew member who untied her tried to set her on her feet, and she collapsed. She could not stand up. They didn't know how long she'd been out there for. She was clearly suffering. She was incoherent. Her lips were swollen. Her voice was raspy. There was just like skin coming off her lips because they were so chapped.
And probably
her
sunburned.
Cheeks were sunken. Oh yeah. Her skin was blazing from a burn.
Oh God.
They're black and white photos, right? You can see how dark her skin is and how light her hair is. They carried her limp body to one of the cabins. After gently removing the salt spray from her body with damp towels, putting Vaseline on her lips, and carefully getting some juice and water into her system, she began to speak through those parched, cracked lips. She said her name was Terry Jo Duperalt. The ship she'd been on had sunk, and she'd been on the float for several days. She said her family was dead, lost to the sea. Her movements and her voice weakened, and she got this information out and then fell into a semi-comatose state, but only after grading out the name of the ship, Bluebell. Now, people had been alerted, so they had heard after, of course, the skipper/captain got in there. Mm-hmm. They knew kind of to be on the lookout that this had been happening, and they'd been searching. There'd been planes going out of the ocean looking for this, so everybody was a little aware of it. Captain Kotsidontis contacted the U.S. Coast Guard, who sent a chopper out to collect Terry Jo and get her to a hospital in Miami. It took her 2 days to begin talking again after she was treated for exposure, dehydration, and a severe sunburn. The sun had been so intense, her hair had been bleached.
Oh, my God.
What she had to tell them countered Captain Harvey's story of a storm at sea and a series of unfortunate accidents. And I was like, well, wouldn't they have known if there was a storm? It didn't sound like there was a storm at any point. So Terry Jo and her family had boarded the Bluebell on November 8th. Her father, Arthur, had been in World War II and had sailed between the Florida Keys and the Bahamas, and he'd long dreamed of being able to afford to take his family on that same cruise. After years of saving up, they'd had enough money, and they decided to head out to escape the cold of their home in Green Bay, Wisconsin. They were prepared to stay until sometime in early December, though it started out as we'll go for a week. We'll see how we feel about it. If they were enjoying themselves. If all went well, he actually hoped to basically give up his practice and to live on a boat and sail the world with his family in the future. So this was a trial for them to try this out and see how everybody liked it. Arthur didn't just hire a stranger to entrust his family to. He hired an old buddy, Harvey, who was in charge of the Bluebell, owned by a man named Harold Pegg, who allowed Harvey to live on the ship along with paying him $300 per month to take any hired gigs that came along. Arthur paid $515 for the chartering of the ship, plus he paid Harvey $100 per day for being their skipper. So this wasn't a bad arrangement here for this guy. They left the Bahia Mar Marina in Fort Lauderdale in the early afternoon. They stopped off at various places along the way and were having a great time. They did snorkeling. They did all these other activities at all these different ports of call. On the 12th, they stopped off prior to turning around to return back to Florida. That night, they had dinner, and Terry Jo went to bed earlier even than her younger sister. It was only about 9 p.m. For some reason, the adults had decided to sail at night for the first time on this journey. So nobody could, because this is just the child who wasn't there, she knows that they said they're going to sail at night and that they were all kind of a little excited about it because this was like new and, oh, it'll be exciting to sail at night. So I'm wondering if the captain didn't push for this, right? Harvey probably said, oh, you know what, to get to such and such or to get ahead of this thing, I'm going to go ahead and sail the night, right? So he's setting something up already is what I'm reading from this. But since she doesn't actually know how that was arranged. Sometime later, she woke up to a bunch of loud noises. Her brother was screaming, "Help, Dad, help." There was rumbling and stomping. Terry Jo climbed out of her bed and headed above deck. When she got up there, she crossed into the main cabin next to the galley, and there on the floor in a large puddle of blood were her brother and her mom. There was a knife somewhere on the floor. She kept going, stepping out of the cabin and onto the deck, and there was Harvey, who had a bucket in his hands. He hit her, then pushed her back toward the cabins, yelling at her to go back below. So she obeyed. She's 11? And she climbed back into bed. But then there was some sort of hammering, and within a few minutes, oil and water started to fill her cabin. She stayed, afraid to go back up, and Harvey returned, a gun in his hand. They stared at each other until he turned and walked back out, which was followed by more hammering. But yeah, I watched a video with her because I had to find out how to pronounce Duperalt. And yeah, she said he walked in and they were just looking into each other's eyes. She doesn't know how much time passed, and it was so intense. And then he just turns and walks back out again. Now, she never saw any of her other family members. She saw her mom and brother dead. She would never see any of the others. She doesn't know what happened to them. The water was getting deeper, and when her mattress started floating, she called out asking if the boat was sinking. Harvey responded that it was and said, "Come help me with the dinghy." So she went back up to the deck and took the rope holding. He handed her the rope, and so she takes the rope. And he walked away to grab something. So I figured he'd been stalking stuff this whole time, right? Mm-hmm. And then she lost her grip and the rope slid over the sides. The dinghy starts floating away. Harvey came back, realized she'd lost the dinghy, and without another word, he dove over the side, climbed aboard the dinghy, and left her there on the Bluebell as it sank.
What a peach.
Yeah. Wow. Joe was no idiot, though. She remembered the cork float, and she went and grabbed it, throwing it to the side of the sinking ship, just as the Bluebell started to go under the surface. She was able to swim to the float and climb on, but it was too small for her to recline. For the 4 days she was on the float, she had to sit up in the stiff position in which she'd been found. There was webbing for the bottom again in that frame, and the webbing had actually started to tear over her days there. So she couldn't even sit on it because it was all bedraggled. There were no emergency rations on the float. Obviously, it's just a floaty. It's meant to be thrown over the side like a life preserver, so somebody can grab it and kind of get up to safety until somebody can get them off. It's not like a raft that was meant to be able to float for a few days. In fact, after her rescue, a different ship did find the cork float, and since Captain Theo hadn't bothered bringing it on board when they brought her up, and they said it was one more day and it would have basically just dissolved into the ocean. During a time floating on the ocean, a pod of dolphins swam beside her for a distance, and planes flew overhead. Of course, none of them spotting her on a white float against white caps on the waves. The day after Terry Joe had been fished from the water, word got to Harvey in Miami, who was being questioned still. His story just didn't hold up, and they were pushing him for the truth. When they told him that she'd been found alive and was getting better in the hospital, he shouted, "Oh my God." And then he was like, oh, that's such great news. It's so wonderful that she's safe.
It's so subtle.
That's right.
Yeah.
He asked to go home and continue the questioning later, then went to a nearby hotel where he wrote a suicide note and used a razor blade to slash the arteries in his thighs. He also slashed his ankles, and then he slashed his jugular. Like, he was done. He was determined to go.
Yeah.
Jugular one's rare.
Right? I was like, I think one, maybe not the ankles, but one of those other ones would have probably done the trick for you in a few minutes, guy.
If you're bleeding out of the femoral, what do you need the ankle ones for?
Right. That's the one that I was like, really? His ankles? Did somebody make a mistake in this? Or I don't know. When a maid found him a couple of hours after check-in, the note said, "I got too tired and nervous. I couldn't stand it any longer." He asked for his 14-year-old son to be taken care of and asked for a sea burial, but didn't explain anything he'd done or admit to it or anything. It was just, I was too nervous. Please take care of my son.
I'm busted. I'm totally screwed.
Yep. Whoops. That's all it could have said. Whoops. Oopsie. Yeah. On November 20th, 3 days after Harvey's death, Terry Joe spilled the information I've already related to you about her final sights before going into the water. They asked her if there had been a fire, and she said no. And they asked her about the storm and the broken mast and all this. And she was like, no, none of that happened. That didn't happen. In short, everything Harvey had said had been a lie, other than the part where he'd fished Renee's body from the water and brought it onto the boat. It will never be known for sure, but it's likely he did so to try and protect him from any blame, right? Figuring if he tried to rescue somebody, they wouldn't think he'd done anything wrong. Look, I was able to pull her from the ocean.
I saved someone.
Which, how messed up is that, to pull a dead body from the water, to chill with you on the boat, not knowing how long until you although he probably had an idea because he would have known exactly where they were.
Yeah.
And where he needed to go in the dinghy. With the new information from Terry Joe, investigators started looking into Harvey's life and past. He was a decorated war veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, but after the wars, he'd had trouble keeping jobs. This had led him to financial trouble. It's not clear if his wife knew, but it seems she likely didn't. He'd taken an insurance policy out on her with a special double indemnity clause that gave him double her insurance if she died by accidental means. They'd only been married in July 1961, and he'd taken the policy out on her in September. This was a new wife who he killed because this all happened in 1961.
Did he marry her just to kill her, or?
I had the same question. We're never going to know, but I was like, that seems convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming his son Lance didn't belong to her because they'd been married a year and Lance was like 14.
Oh.
She was a stewardess and had hoped to become a writer someday. Interestingly, they found he had a long history of attempts at fraud. Not only that, but Helen was his sixth wife, and his second wife had died in a watery grave along with her mother, when the car Harvey was driving plowed off a bridge at high speed and landed in a bayou on a rainy 1949 night. He'd been unable to rescue them, he'd said, and he'd been forced to swim to shore to save his own life. So see, he got away with it once at least. I really wanted to find more about, I was like, is she the only wife that died? Like,
yeah,
or were there more wives?
He may be more successful at killing wives than the Axeman was.
Than the Emperor.
Yeah, we were all thinking it.
But I couldn't find, because everything's about the sea orphan, and he really wasn't covered as a separate entity. So that would be really interesting to do a deep dive on.
That would be.
Joan Harvey and Myrtle May Burgess Boylan drowned, and he was left to collect Joan's insurance. And I don't know, possibly Myrtle's. If there weren't any siblings, that money might have come to him too. I could not also find that. You know, with these, it's always like, they leave out some of the stuff I want to know.
Yeah.
He had at least twice sunk a ship belonging to him, getting the insurance on those vessels. The last incident in which he'd received a large insurance settlement was the sinking of his ship in Cuba in 1958. He must have already burned through his income from that accident, because that was, 49, and needed more. Though he had a free place to live with his new wife, as well as a salary, so I'm not sure where the money was going. I looked, I didn't see anything about gambling or betting or substance abuse, but there was something that he was spending all this money on.
Well, some people just want more. It doesn't matter how much they have. It's never enough.
That's true. Authorities theorized that he had planned to kill his wife on the ship and throw her overboard, likely discovering, in quotes, her missing with his passengers as witnesses that an accident had occurred. They don't think he set out intending to kill this whole family, but they think that she fought back and it woke them up. And they'd witnessed something, and he'd had to kill them too. Terry Jo went back to Wisconsin to live with relatives in Des Peres. You might think she developed a fear of water, but no. She felt the water had saved her from the certain death he'd left her to, and she spent the rest of her life finding ways to be around water. For example, she worked with the Department of Natural Resources and Fisheries, then Water Resources and Water Regulation and Zoning. In a 48 Hours interview she'd later grant, she said, quote, I went on to protect the water that had protected me as a little girl. Water is life, and it is soothing for me to be on the beach. I find I can think clearly, relax, and feel closer to my lost family. Quote. She also kept the clothing she'd been wearing when she was rescued. She insisted she would not let them throw it away. She did change her name, switching from Terry to Tere to reclaim herself, eventually getting married and having 3 children. She never got counseling, and no one would discuss her ordeal with her. I mean, in that time, you didn't. Right.
You didn't.
And they just wouldn't talk about it. They're like, we don't talk about that. So it took her decades to finally be willing to speak about what had happened to her. She refused to be seen as a victim, instead wanting to be called a survivor. She felt she'd been saved for a reason. This is her big thing. And she said, I know it took me 40 years to finally start talking to people, but I want them to hear my story, because if it keeps them having hope or something, then that's why this happened. In 1988, Oprah had her reunite with Captain Kaupstadontis on air, though she still didn't talk about those 4 days at sea. Asked for why she wasn't killed, it's thought he likely would have shot her before going overboard into the dinghy, but her losing the rope had forced him to jump in after it instead. And that's what saved her, is her not being able to hold an entire boat when she was 11 years old. And he likely figured an 11-year-old wouldn't have the wherewithal to save herself, and that she drowned when the ship sank, and it would, that mission accomplished either way. She wrote a memoir called Alone, Orphaned on the Ocean in 2010. Considering a story of great hope, it was after the release of her book that she finally talked about her experience on the Today Show, where Matt Lauer interviewed her. In an interview with 48 Hours, that same one I already mentioned, she said that some of her teachers had shown up to her book signing and apologized for not knowing how to reach out to her after what had happened. They had been instructed also not to ever talk to her about it. They said they'd been told they had to do that, and the expectation was that's going to get her past it. If we don't talk about it, she'll just move past it. Everything's great. Give her homework. Because of the near miss with her float blending in with the Whitecaps, the Coast Guard changed regulations in 1962 to require orange life rafts, which has become an international requirement. That's why we have orange life rafts and life rafts. Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yep. Because if he hadn't seen her, if he hadn't kept watching because something seemed a little bit different, that would have dissolved. She had one more day, 2 more days maybe
the
on.
Sharks were already ready.
They were ready. Yeah. I wonder, the dolphin pod probably kept them away for a little while, but once they were gone. Sources were Wikipedia, CBS News, Today, Reader's Digest, Extraordinary Lives on YouTube was the video I watched where it was her talking about it and her husband and her aunt, everybody that took her in. So it was an interesting thing to hear in her own words. Yeah. See, I was just like, that's an interesting story.
It is.
I won't do a serial killer this time.
Fine.
But
although we are very fond of axe murderers, so that was nice.
Well, axe attempted murderers.
I was wondering, though, we hear about axe murders in the U.S. all the time, but I don't know if we look at the same period. I haven't heard that there were a bunch like in England, and surely they were chopping their wood there with an axe too, right? So now I'm curious. Was that a purely American thing?
Well, I mean, you have, like, there are some older, where axe was the weapon for war. You would fight with an axe.
Well, that's true. Battle axes, right? Basically.
Mm-hmm.
So
I imagine they got used off the battlefield too.
Yeah. But it seems like there was this period, late 1800s to early 1900s.
1900s, early. Yeah.
And where people were just like, I think I would have figured out eventually, you know what? I think I'm going to lock up my axe.
Yeah.
It's an extra insult to get murdered with your own axe. Like,
right?
Like,
damn it, dude. What would you have used if I didn't have my axe just out in my yard? A whole ass weapon.
You should carry your own axe to come kill me.
You should build yourself a little belt and put a little hatchet in it. Maybe you could swing that puppy with enough force then. And actually, it is a lot of times an actual hatchet instead of an axe, right?
Yeah,
We've learned that one too. They'll call him the axe murderer, and then it's a hatchet, which is, yes, mostly the same thing. But
the handgun of axes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Axe murderer just sounds better.
It does.
Hatchet murderer.
Yeah. The hatchet, but I mean, everybody did have them. They had them for cutting wood. They had them for, cutting up kindling. They had them for beheading a chicken for dinner.
For murder.
I really think most of them just was a twist.
The twist? Oh, for the
my
chickens.
Parents grew up on farms, so my dad had to do the chickens.
But then you would use the hatchet to cut the head off.
Sure, or a knife. I mean, usually that was preparing it, and she was using a knife. Nice big knife.
It would be easier with a hatchet,
but you don't keep a hatchet in the kitchen.
But you would cut the head off outside because you have to let all the blood out.
It's not a pig.
Well, no, but there's still blood.
You ever watch somebody process the chicken though? They don't hang it up like that.
No. But I mean, did you?
They take in the kitchen, they chop that shit off, and they just pick off those feathers. Have you ever seen somebody defeather this is a terrible topic. A dead chicken, though, they're really fast.
I have not.
It's really weird to watch. I have not myself killed and cleaned a chicken. And it's not like my dad talked about it much, but he was just like, well, they would also, you break their necks, but you spin it so that the neck would break. He obviously preferred not to do it that way. But I'm surprised he didn't have a thing about chickens because he used to have to go catch the crawfish.
Mm-hmm.
And he absolutely hated crustaceans after his youth spent having to hunt down the crawfish to eat. And so I used to torment him. We went to Red Lobster or something, there were the lobsters. And then I would send him pictures if I went somewhere with a crustacean.
And you wondered why he sent you pictures of snakes.
Rattlesnakes.
I don't wonder anymore.
No, he was doing that first, in my defense. He liked to torture me just a little bit. I was the oldest of 5. I'm Gen X. They were all millennials. They were all much closer together. There was 5.5-year gap between myself and the oldest. And so they watched Barney, and I fucking hated Barney. I hated Barney with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. So my dad loved to get me little novelty gifts with Barney. Here are your Christmas presents, and here is a little Barney in the Cars Matchbox car Barney in your stocking or something like that. So we had this back and forth. It was how we showed we loved each other.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. So yeah, he had to hike through Ute Valley Park. He didn't have to, he could have driven, but he liked to hike through Ute Valley Park to get to work. And there's rattlesnakes. And in the morning, you're going to run into a ton of them because they're out trying to warm themselves up. And so he would send me pictures. And, you know, honestly, I think it was his last act on purpose. After he died, my husband had to kind of hack into his eye gaze computer because he had ALS so that I could access stuff and notify people and get information and stop things that were being automatically paid for and shut down his Amazon, you know, all that kind of stuff. And do you know what his desktop photo was?
It was a rattlesnake.
It was a rattlesnake. And I was like, son of a bitch. Now you did that on purpose. But it was also a good picture of one. So I don't know. Maybe he just did it because he really liked to have a rattlesnake on his desktop. We don't know.
It could be.
We'll never know. Usually, just they never found any of the bodies from that boat. They never found if he stabbed everybody, if he pushed somebody overboard, if he I want to know how he wiped everybody out.
And they never found the boat.
They never found the boat.
I mean, he obviously killed himself not just because of this boat, but because that was going to open up a lot of doors
right
into his past. Like, ooh, we're going to have to talk about my dead wives, and
yeah,
they're going to put all these pieces together.
It's amazing to me how long somebody can get away with being a black widow or a black widower, which I still think is the stupidest. He's also a widow, man. Like, that's so stupid. Why does he get a different name? And why is it widower? Because in my grammatic brain, that would be the person who died. The widower. You created a widow. The widower.
Oh.
Anyway, drives me nuts every time I have to say it. So, but they get away with it. They can kill like this string of spouses where somebody's like, hey, it seems a little weird that
your 9 previous partners are dead.
That's right.
And a lot of them don't own up to the fact that they've had 4 previous spouses.
Right. But their family members fucking know.
Yeah.
And everything gets investigated if your spouse dies, unless it, you know, even if it's an accident, they have to look into it. And if you have insurance on them every time,
you would think.
Tell you that the insurance company, because insurance exists to actually fuck people over, in my opinion, but they are going to investigate it and they don't even catch on and they don't want to pay. So it always blows my mind how long they can get away with it.
Yeah. It's like, how many people can you take out insurance policies on?
Right. There should be a limit. It should be like, sorry, this is your 6th wife and we will no longer allow you to take out insurance.
She has to insure herself and not tell you about it.
That's right. You have to have a 3 strikes insurance law.
But do you I don't know if you have to tell somebody that you have an insurance policy on them.
There might be changes in laws now where you have to sign off on it. I believe I had to sign off when my husband did his and mine. His is way more than mine. So he's clearly not planning to knock me off to get any money because it really wouldn't do any good. Just enough to pay the cost, right?
Exactly.
But yeah. So
it is hard now to get a small insurance policy that will just cover burial costs.
Yeah.
They want you to start at $500,000 or $100,000. I'm like, okay, but why? Bury me in the backyard. It won't cost much at all.
Let me on fire. Put me in the water.
Yeah. Any of those will work.
Put me on a pier. A pyre. Either one. Whatever. My ancestors just burned their people. Okay. I don't get the burial thing either.
Put them on a boat. Sent them off. Lit it on fire.
With the arrow. Do it. The famous Viking funeral. You know what? I'm afraid if I looked into that, that would really not be how they actually did it because it's one of those things.
I'm pretty sure you could pay to do it now, though.
Yeah, because I could swear I've seen like somebody was told it was illegal and they were like, oh, I'm going to do it anyway. And then they did it illegally.
Well, when you think about it, because you're polluting whatever body of water you're with human remains. So,
yeah. I mean, like whatever you use as an accelerant and all that good stuff you're putting in the water.
If it's a big enough body of water, fine, it's going to dissipate. But if you're doing it, I'm thinking of Prospect Lake. That's just not big enough. I can walk around Prospect Lake in like 15 minutes. So,
yeah.
No.
You don't know. Like, what is it? Loch Ness is really, really, really deep, but it's not that big surface area.
Right. Well, but
I know Prospect was good. I'm just saying, like,
Yes.
like that's not an indication.
True.
And I only know that because I covered that. I wrote a brief thing for somebody recently. Not for, again, the book launch. I've been writing, guest posts on native lore, and so it's in my head right now, okay? I even remember something like Loch Ness at its deepest point is like 740, is it feet or meters now? That I don't remember anymore. And then Chesapeake Bay is only like 100 something at its deepest, but it covers a ton of surface area.
Yes.
So there's your random factoids for the day.
Why, thank you.
Christina, have you watched any good horror lately?
It's been slim lately.
It has been. That's why
I feel like we're seeing the result of everything shutting down for a while with the strike. Like nothing got produced. There was some good stuff at Telluride. That was in October. Since then, mostly I've watched the stuff from Telluride come out and hit platforms. But yeah.
I watched some goofy things on Shudder recently, and they were amusing, but they weren't. I wanted horror.
I will say, this round at Telluride, there was definitely the ones where they catch a reputation in the first couple days. There was one there were two that were, they're like, oh, you have to watch it, but oh my God. And yeah.
Okay.
Like When Evil Lurks was one of them.
Okay.
I think I saw that director came to Telluride a couple years before with Terrified.
Oh, yeah. Terrified was good.
Yeah. It's that same sort of like possession, but not through the Catholic lens.
Yeah.
Which is refreshing, I think. And but that axe scene was pretty rough, and kids are involved, not the same way as that other movie we talked about, but
they are a lot. And
there was one called The Coffee Table that there was baby involved, and
okay, good to know.
I haven't seen that one hit platforms yet. There was a spider movie that I really enjoyed from France that I think is hitting Shudder in April.
Speaking of all that too, so 6 Feet Under is the one that's run by the coroner. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they do it like much more frequently. They had one this month with a movie from Telluride.
The Frogman?
Frogman, yeah. I watched that when we were out in Telluride. And then next month in April is their big, like, I don't remember what they call it, but it's all these scream queens from like Frankenhooker and those really bad 80s movies.
Yeah.
So, and like they do a shorts. They do shorts block pretty frequently. And we went and saw, the last one I went to was Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and The Society. Because they had the special effects person there. And I hadn't seen The Society.
Yeah, you hadn't?
Oh, no.
Okay.
And the special effects guy, I can't, I'm blanking on the name. He like apologized to us before we started the movie.
What was The Society about?
So, wow, Society. You've seen it more recently.
About?
Yeah, it's all I remember. I just really remember the effects from it because it's like I think they're high society, but they all gather for.
Yeah. It is basically about rich people feeding on poor people.
Yeah,
literally and figuratively, but the special effects are wild. And we're watching the movie and I'm like, why did he apologize to us? This isn't bad. And then you get to the like melted orgy scene and you're like, holy shit, this is why.
Yeah, there's a really bizarre, I mean, if you think about some
melted
of the
orgy
special effects from like Fred from the Nightmare on Elm Street, and just think about the skin, right? And the things they did with the skin, and then you make that into an orgy where it's like skin melding and
it was a lot. Like I'm just watching and I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
I really wanted to go to that, and I think I had something else, so I couldn't go because I did see that. I had seen Society before that, but only because of Joe Bob Briggs on Shudder, and I wanted to go because I wanted to hear the audience when the scene came up.
It was Like, there are certain things that are good, like festival watches.
Yes.
Because you don't have the same movie theater etiquette as like a normal screening where you're quiet and you wait. Like, it's a fest. Everyone's there for the same reason, and you get much more vocal. But that one was a good one for that. And then
I liked Cabin in the Woods live when it came. Well, not live, but when we went to see it in the theater, that was a really good one to see in the theater. So I would watch that if he did that one.
That one's such a good movie.
It was. And when it first came out, nobody knew what that opening was. Because I remember we're all looking around at each other in the theater like, are we in the wrong movie? And it takes a while. And you're seeing people start thinking they did it perfectly because you're starting to think, okay, I got to get up and I'm going to go check.
You're right.
But once the monsters and everything break loose, like it became a whole audience. The audience was in it and it wasn't obnoxious and everybody was into it. And it was so fun. That was just a normal late night viewing of it.
Yeah.
So that would be fun at a fest. Definitely.
Yeah.
And we did it. Pikes Peak Writers did it with Stephen Graham Jones breaking it. We would stop the movie. We did it downtown. In Manitou at what was then, it was the Mac and now it's the Back. Now it's the Business of Art Center. But anyway, we'd break into the movie and then Stephen Graham Jones would give some random trivia on it and like do a little talk and then we'd start it again. That was pretty fun.
I missed that.
Oh, yeah. We did it
I'm very bummed.
It ended up being a fundraiser that we gave money for Black Forest Fire, but it was meant to make money for non-conference events.
Yeah, for Pikes Peak Writers.
Yes. So yeah, we donated that money, but that was a really fun event.
Yeah.
He's always game to come do fun stuff. So that's why they kept using him at the festival.
Absolutely.
He's like, okay, I'll come out.
We always want to do the events we actually want to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. And then you don't have to pay to go to it.
Yep.
There is that.
That's why I volunteer at Colorado Festival of Horror because I was like, I want to be here, but I could do so much more stuff than just attend.
Yeah.
Like last year, I was like a celebrity handler. Like I just sat at the table with them and gave them water and whatever.
Nice.
I heard so many interesting behind the scenes tidbits from like Final Destination and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Muppet Treasure Island. It was a great time. I had a great time.
Listen, Tim Curry was in that. There's probably some fun stuff about Tim Curry now because he's fabulous. Still.
Indeed.
All right. So as we wrap it up, do you have like a website or something like that where people can find you and your books?
Yeah, I have ChristinaBergling.com and pretty much on social things, I'm under my name. So easy to find.
That's good. Yes. I had already branded myself a different way. So then I'm always like, it is branded so I can give that out. But then I'm like, yes, but sorry.
But we've evolved. We're different.
I know
now.
what the rules are and everything. I just didn't do them originally. It was too late because I was already branded. So whoops. All right. So check out Christina's books. And what was the most recent anthology you were in?
It was the horror collection put out by Kevin Kennedy in the UK, and it was the Monster Edition.
Okay.
Nice.
So check that out. And what did you say your last book was? It was like The Follower.
Followers, yep.
Okay, Followers. So yeah, find all that. Go to ChristinaBergling.com. And thanks for listening. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you both.
And bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back with more shenanigans.